Morning, everybody. I've been given the podium, so you're in danger. No, you're not. It's very good to see everybody. Good to see our family here. We have a lot of visitors here, and hope we get to know you better, and we can serve you in some way. Just let us know. That's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. Sometimes people who are leading singing on Sundays will ask me, hey, what's your theme going to be, so I can pick some songs relevant to that? And Mark, I never doubted you for a second, but when I told him what it was going to be, I was kind of thinking, what is he going to pick that would have anything to do with that? And it was perfect. It was very, very appropriate. And so I'm really excited to get into it this morning. Last week, we introduced the theme for the year, which was building godly families. We're going to talk about that throughout the entire year. And what we talked about last week was that God's design for the family is very good. No matter how unpopular it might be, no matter if we don't like it or our best friends don't like it, God's design for the family is very, very good. And then at the end of last week, I tried to branch it out and extend it because God is the architect and builder of families, but He's also the architect and builder of everything. So God's designed for everything, for each and every one of us and everything that we do. His design for everything is very, very good. And so this morning, what I want to talk about is rejecting God's good design. Rejecting God's very good order. That's what we're going to spend all of our time this morning talking about. And specifically, if you want to turn to number 16, we're going to notice 7 things that are true about God and rejecting God's good design, His good order from Numbers 16. Number 16. This is not directly a building godly families lesson. It's not directly about that, but this is a great example of what rejecting God's design, rejecting what God's order looks like. And we're going to find 7 things that really we need to think about today from this example in Numbers 16. So while you're turning over to Numbers 16, just a little bit of context for where we are in the Bible story at this point. We're after the Exodus from Egypt. And the people who had gone out of Egypt, they crossed over the Red Sea. They should have gone straight into the promised land that God had given to them. They should have just conquered everybody and had no problem at all because God had already given them the land. But the people were unfaithful and they sinned against God over and over and over again, and they ruined it for themselves. So now, as a punishment and as a refinement of the people, they have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years before their children get to go enter the promised land. They don't get to do it. And in that time period, in that 40 years, there's all kinds of examples of rebellion, of rejecting God, and just disrespecting God's order. And today we're going to read one of those examples. And by the way I originally had this set up, we'd be going for 3 days because there's just so much that we could talk about. So this is really exciting. I'm excited to get into this with you. So number 16, let's read the first 11 verses, please. And we're going to see 7 things from rejecting God's order. First 11 verses, please. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took action. They rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" When Moses heard this, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his, who is holy, and will bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. Do this. Take censers," your translation might say fire pans there, "for yourselves. Korah and all your company. Put fire in them. Lay incense upon them in the presence of the Lord tomorrow, and the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, you sons of Levi." Then Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them, and that he has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you? And are you seeking the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. But as for Aaron, who is he? that you grumble against him. Okay, it's a big reading, but right away in this chapter, we already see there's grumbling, there's complaining, there are people rejecting something. They are rebelling against something. And the main agitators we get to see right away in verse 1, the main agitators. The first one that's mentioned is Korah, and it said that he's a Levite. That's a really, really important detail because the Levites are the only ones who can have anything to do with the tabernacle, with setting it up, with breaking it down, with moving it. But even more specifically, when you're talking about the priests, only the sons of Aaron could be priests. Now, Korah is not a son of Aaron, so he can't be a priest. It would be a violation of God's order for him to be a priest. But Korah comes up here and comes up against Moses and Aaron, and they have some complaints about what's going on. There's another little detail. I could really go down the rabbit hole, but I'm not going to do it. About Korah, if you look at Numbers 3, you can see this short genealogy. Korah's father was the second-born son of his father, but he did not become the head or the chief of that clan. The fourth-born son did. So his father got overlooked and got passed over for a leadership role. And then later on, Korah, who is older than the next head or the next chief of the Kohathites, was also passed over. So maybe there's a family history of Korah's dad and Korah already being passed over for things that may affect some of the things that he does here. Really interesting to me. Maybe that's why he causes some of these issues. Okay, so Korah is a Levite who cannot be a priest, but one of his chief complaints is going to be that he should be able to be a priest. But then we see some other agitators in verse 1, Dathan, Abiram, and On. We're not going to see On's name again, which is really interesting to me, but all three of these are the descendants of Reuben. Now, I think that's an important detail too, because if you look at the history of the sons of Jacob, Reuben is the firstborn. And usually the firstborn son becomes the leader or the chief of the clan after the father passes away. But when Jacob is blessing the sons before he passes away, he tells Reuben specifically, it's not going to be you. So Reuben has a history of being overlooked for a leadership role, being overlooked in some way, and so maybe that's something that affects the descendants of Reuben as well. So it's interesting that you have Korah, who's a Levite, who's been passed over before, and you have Reubenites, who have a history of being passed over before, and these are the people coming up against Moses and Aaron, and they have this complaint against them. Well, these men, along with, in verse 2, it says 250 leaders of the congregation. And in verse 2, it says specifically that they're well-known, they're respected men. So could you imagine if you're Moses and Aaron and you see 250 of the leaders, people who everybody knows, who everybody respects, and they're coming against you? I mean, that can't feel very good. So these people are coming up against them. And in this first interaction, it looks like Korah, the Levite, might be the ringleader of this first interaction. He says, "You've gone far enough." Your translation might say, "You've gone too far," or "You're taking too much on yourselves." Verse 3, the claim is, everyone in this camp is holy. Everyone is. The Lord is in the presence of everybody in this camp. So you, Moses and Aaron, why are you exalting yourselves above everybody else? Everybody's holy. The Lord's in everybody's presence. So why are you exalting yourselves? And it's interesting that that's kind of what they come with, because part of that is true. If you think about all the way back in Exodus 19, when the Lord makes a covenant with his people, he says, you're going to be a holy nation. That's true. The people are supposed to be holy. And the Lord is in the midst of his people. That's true too. But they're leaving out some really important details about what God had said relating to the priesthood. But they're taking something that's true and not including everything. And so I think that's where some of their misunderstanding comes from. And it's really interesting to me. They say, you're exalting yourselves above the assembly of the Lord. When the reality is they were not exalting themselves. It was God who put them in the positions that they were in. And if Moses specifically is exalting himself, his reaction to this makes no sense. Did you see what he did in verse 4? In verse 4, Moses falls on his face. That's a sign of vulnerability. That's a sign of humility. That's a place where you could very easily be killed. If you fall on your face, your neck is exposed. You can very easily be killed by whoever's coming up against you. So if Moses is truly exalting himself and making himself this great leader, this makes no sense. That's not what he was doing at all. But what I really like about Moses' response, he falls on his face in humility and vulnerability, but he doesn't say, look, this is what I'm going to decide that we're going to do. He says, let's let the Lord decide who is holy. Let's put it to a test and let God decide. It's not Moses making the judgment in this. Moses says, let's give it to God. So he comes up with this test, with this plan. Tomorrow morning, you and your 250 that are with you, bring your fire pans, bring your censers, which it's likely a small bronze platter that they would personally burn incense on. So you all take that, and tomorrow morning, you all, and Aaron is going to be a part of this, we're going to burn incense to the Lord. And whichever one the Lord chooses, that's who we're going to go with. He doesn't say, look, it's Aaron, so you all just leave and go home. He says, let's let the Lord decide this. Let's put it to a test. And so tomorrow morning, this is what we're going to do. And then it's really funny, at the end of what Moses has just said, he throws the same thing that they started with. They started with, you've gone too far. You've gone far enough. You're putting too much on yourselves. He says, actually, you've gone too far, you sons of Levi. It's you who are putting too much on yourselves. You all have gone far enough. So he's letting them know it's actually them. But this is the thing I really want to emphasize, because what's the real motive behind Korah and his company, and then even Dathan and Abiram? We're going to get to them later, but mainly Korah and his company. What's the root of it? Verses 8 through 11, Moses cuts right to the root of it, because Moses says, listen, you Levites. He says, isn't it enough for you? Your translation might say, is it a small thing to you that the Lord chose your tribe out of all of the tribes of Israel to bring you close to himself? Remember, the Levites were the only ones who could really touch the tabernacle, could set it up, could break it down, could do all of these things. The Levites were the only ones who could do that. And he's saying, look, isn't it enough for you that out of all the tribes, you are so blessed to be able to be this close? In the camp, by the way, the Levites lived right around the tabernacle, and then the rest of the tribes lived beyond the Levites. So it's almost like there was a rectangle around the tabernacle of Levites, and then that's where everybody else was after that. Isn't it enough for you? Is it a small thing that you get to be the closest to the Lord? And then, even more specifically for Korah's family, they were the Kohathites. Those Kohathites, they got to carry the most sacred objects in the tabernacle. We're talking the Ark of the Covenant. They got to carry that. If they were to rank order, they didn't rank order, but if they were, it would be like priests, people who get to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And Moses is saying, isn't that enough for you? But they weren't priests. They were focused on what they didn't have and not focused on what they did have, at the blessing that they did have. And that brings us to our first of 7. They're going to come fast, I promise. The first of 7 points that we're going to talk about this morning about rejecting God's order. Rejecting God's order is often the result of ingratitude. Rejecting God's order is often the result of being ungrateful for what you have. Not being grateful for what you have and wishing for something that you don't have. Especially for Korah and his immediate family, those Kohathites, they were so blessed to carry the most sacred objects of the tabernacle. They were right under the priests, but they weren't priests. They were so focused on what they didn't have, they missed what they did have. And so that's what led them to end up rejecting God here. And the second point that I really want to talk about that's really important from this section, in verse 11, Moses makes it very clear. Korah and his company and all these people, they're not just coming up against Moses and Aaron. He says, you're actually coming up against the Lord himself. So rejecting God's order is actually rejecting God. If we reject God's design for something or God's order for something, it's not just rejecting the design, it's actually coming against the Lord himself, just like Moses said in verse 11 to these Levites. And I think that's so important for us today, because when we see the way that God designs or orders our families, or the way that he designs or orders the local congregation, or the boundaries and restrictions in his order that he places on us every day, we can be so focused on what we don't get to do, on what we don't get to have, and we can look around and see everybody who gets all the stuff that we want, and, well, I don't get that we completely miss the tremendous, immeasurable blessings that we do have from God. When, if Moses were here today, he'd be saying, isn't it enough for you that you have this, and this, and this, and this? And he would never stop saying this, by the way, but we can all get so caught up in looking at other people that we miss what we have. And man, that's so, so important. And then on top of that, if we begin to question and really go up against the design and order that God sets up, we're not just rejecting the design or the order, we're actually rejecting God himself. So we've got to be really careful, all of us, even if we have good intentions about trying to reject God's order or his design in some area, we're rejecting God himself. Okay, let's keep reading though, because for Korah and the Levites, and those 250 there, their main complaint was about the priesthood. Everyone's holy, everyone should be a priest, but now it's going to shift to those Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, and they have a different complaint. So let's keep reading. Look with me, please, at verse 12. Let's start in verse 12. We'll read down to verse 15, please. Verse 12. Then Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come up. Is it not enough that you've brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in this wilderness? But would you also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." Then Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, "Do not regard their offering. I have not taken a single donkey from them, nor have I done any harm to any of them." So here in these verses, it's fascinating to me because Dathan, Abiram, and On were mentioned up in verse 1, but it seems like they're not there with Korah and the 250. So I'm not sure exactly how they know that they're in this rebellion, but they know somehow because Moses sends a summons to them. And what's the first thing they say? "We're not coming up." So already you see they don't accept the authority of Moses. They've already rejected him entirely. We're not coming up to you. No way we're doing that. And they actually use the same phrase or the same words that Moses used talking to those Levites, where he said, "Isn't it enough for you? Is it a small thing to you?" Dathan and Abiram say, "Is it a small thing to you? Isn't it enough? You took us from a land that's flowing with milk and honey for us to die in this wilderness." What land are they talking about? They're talking about Egypt. They called that a land flowing with milk and honey. That's what God said the promised land is. And they're saying, yeah, Egypt was a land flowing with milk and honey, and you've just brought us out into this wilderness to die. You're a pretty ineffective leader, Moses, is essentially what they're saying. He said, you haven't brought us into fields or vineyards. You haven't brought us to the true promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. You haven't done any of those things. And now will you gouge out the eyes of these men too? That's a fascinating Hebrew idiom for deceiving people or giving them false hope, making them blind and just say, trust me, whatever. So it seems like Dathan and Abiram are accusing Moses of, you're giving these people false hope, you're a terrible leader, and you're getting some kind of advantage by being the leader over these people to the detriment of everybody else. We're going to die in this wilderness, so that should be enough for you. We're not coming up to you. You're not a good leader. We reject you. That seems to be what Dathan and Abiram's big issue is. They refuse to come. And the claim that Moses is getting some kind of advantage is a really, there's no better way. It's a really dumb thing to say. Moses prays for God to kill him on several occasions because these people are so insufferable. Insufferable, unsufferable, either way. These people are so ridiculous that he has wished for God to kill him, for him to just let death come upon him. And that's exactly why Moses gets angry. He says, don't accept their offering. I haven't even taken a single donkey from them. I've done no harm to these people at all. He knows that God knows that Moses is completely innocent in this and that they are in the wrong in all of this. And so this brings us to the third big point, third of 7 this morning, about rejecting God's order. Rejecting God's order can also stem from playing the victim. From playing the victim. And this is why I think that is. The Reubenites here are looking at where they are in the wilderness. They're looking at the horizon and the possibilities in their life, and they don't like what they're seeing. And so they're looking around and they're saying, well, Moses is our leader, so he's the worst. Let's get rid of him. We don't care about him. We're going to reject him, and we're going to do something different here. And what they're doing is they're looking at their circumstances. They're saying, I've got it so bad, and they're not acknowledging or taking any responsibility or taking any accountability for the role that they played in getting themselves in that situation. If you remember, it's the sins of the people over and over and over and over again that makes them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. It's not Moses' fault. It's not God's fault. It's actually the fault of the people. But because they don't like what's going on, they are blaming the problem that they've got going on Moses, rather than taking any accountability and responsibility for their own part in not going into the promised land. And similar to this, along with a previous point that we had, rejecting God's authority also rejects, did I say it already? Rejecting God is rejecting God's authority. It's not just rejecting God himself, we talked about that, but it's rejecting his authority. Because here you see Dathan and Abiram, they have no respect for who Moses is. They say that Moses is an ineffective leader and that he shouldn't be the leader over them. Well, Moses didn't choose to be the leader over them. God is the one who appointed Moses the leader over them. So if they are rejecting the very leader that God chose for them, they're rejecting God's authority to choose a leader. Man, that's so important for us today, because when we look at the way that God has ordered or designed our families, the way that he orders or designs our local congregation, or just the restrictions and boundaries on our lives, we can get so caught up in thinking that we are the victims that we severely miss it. When we're looking at our present circumstances and saying, I don't like what I see, I don't like what I think is coming up, and we play the victim, we completely forget that God is the one who has the right, the rule, and the authority over our lives all the time. He has the proper rule and the proper authority. And we are so blessed that he's a benevolent and that he's a loving father. Because if we got what we deserved for the things that we have done against him, we would find out very quickly that we're not the victims. We are not the victims of our circumstances at all. We are extremely blessed. Okay, well, let's keep reading, because Moses now is going to draw his attention back to Korah and the Levites and the 250 and the test that's going to be happening the next day. So number 16, look at verse 16, please. Verse 16. We'll read down to verse 19. Moses said to Korah, you and all your company be present before the Lord tomorrow, both you and they along with Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan and put incense on it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord. 250 fire pans. Also, you and Aaron shall each bring his fire pan. So they each took his own censer and put fire on it. They laid incense on it, and they stood at the doorway of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Thus Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. So this is fascinating to me. Moses here, he repeats sort of the test that's going to go on tomorrow morning. And then the next morning, that they do exactly what they said they were going to do. But verse 19 is so fascinating to me. Look at verse 19. It doesn't say that Moses and Aaron assembled the people. In verse 19, Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Do you think Korah is confident that things are going to go his way here? I think he is. I don't think you gather everybody to come see the event if you think you're going to lose. I think he's very confident that what he's saying is right. He really believes that what he's saying is true. And then look at this. They offer the incense and everything there. At the end of verse 19, then the glory of the Lord appears to all the congregation. So before we even keep reading, maybe at this point, Korah thinks, look, I was right. You've got 250 offerings here of incense, and the glory of the Lord is here. So maybe at this point he thinks, this is exactly what I thought would happen. I'm exactly right. But let's keep reading, because we're going to find out he was desperately wrong. Look with me, verse 20, and we're going to do a little bit of a lengthy reading, 20 to 35. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. But they fell on their faces and said, O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get back from among the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Then Moses arose and went to Dathan and Abiram with the elders of Israel following him. He spoke to the congregation, saying, depart now from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin. So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. Moses said, by this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these deeds, for this is not my doing. If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand these men have spurned the Lord. As he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. Look at verse 34. All Israel who were around them fled at their outcry, for they said, the earth may swallow us up. Fire also came forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. This is intense. At the beginning of this, the Lord was ready to consume everybody except for Moses and Aaron. Did you see that? He said, get away from this people. I'm going to consume all of them instantly. Now, what did the people do? What had they done at this point? Well, there's a history here. There's a lot of context leading up to this. But also, if you remember from verse 19, Korah assembled all the congregation, what did it say? Against them. So it seems like it maybe just by agreement of coming up or whatever it is, they had some kind of role in this rebellion as well. And so God says, I'm ready to consume them instantly. And if I'm Moses or Aaron in this situation, think about all the things you've suffered from these people. I think I'd probably be like, all right, sounds good to me. But these are much more godly men because they both fall on their faces and they make intercession. They mediate for those people. And they say, when one man sins, will you condemn the entire assembly? The very people who came up against him are now being mediated for by the ones they're coming up against. Wow, that's so merciful. That's so gracious. Well, so God changes his tune. He says, okay, now tell the people, you get away from the tents, the dwelling places of Dathan, Abiram, and Korah. You get away. Don't touch any of their stuff, or you'll be swept away in this judgment as well. So Moses and Aaron and the elders of the people, they go to those dwellings, they get everybody away, and Moses makes another really important distinction. He says, I want you to know that it's not me doing this. I want you to know that I haven't set myself over anybody else. Because if these people just, die a natural death, you could say, okay, they just died a natural death. But if the Lord does something that's never been seen before, if he does something entirely new, the ground opens up and the earth swallows them alive into Sheol, then you'll know that it's God and that it's not me. And as soon as he finished saying that, just think about the timing of this. As soon as he finished saying it, ground opens up, swallows them, they go alive into the realm of the dead, it closes back over them. That's some powerful stuff. God has made himself known to this camp. And I really like verse 34 just because I would be doing this and then some. At seeing this thing where the ground opens up and closes back over these people, the people are freaking out. They are running around, they're scared for their lives. The ground's going to swallow us up. And then almost like an afterthought in verse 35, very short verse, it says, fire also came from the Lord and consumed up the 250 men who had been offering the incense there. Wow. So here you see these men who refused to go up to Moses go down into Sheol. And here you see those 250 men who were offering fire to the Lord are consumed by the Lord's fire. And it's all because they reject the order of God. One of the really important things I do want to mention here too is that Korah, not all of his descendants were killed in this. Apparently he had some sons that survived who might not have been part of that, because you see descendants of Korah, they actually become temple singers. And they write several of the Psalms that we have, which is a really fascinating detail to me. We could talk about that for a while, but this brings us to our fifth really important point about rejecting God's order. Rejecting God's order brings judgment. It brings judgment. It was no small thing to design the order and the design for the priesthood or for who God's leaders were or anything that God orders and designs. In this passage, there was supernatural life-ending judgment that came as a result of this rebellion. And I want to remember this. God was ready to wipe out all the people. He was ready to wipe them all out except for Moses and Aaron. But he doesn't do it because Moses and Aaron intercede on behalf of the people. They mediate on behalf of the people. And that brings us to point 6, is that rejecting God's order requires intercession. if it doesn't bring immediate judgment and immediate punishment for it, it is because intercession and mediation has happened, because the grace and mercy of God at someone's intercession, at someone's mediation on your behalf. At this point, Korah and the 250, Dathan and Abiram, they'd gone too far. They'd gone too far, and the judgment was just from God. But for the rest of the people who'd been rejecting God's order up to this point, they are interceded for. They got intercession from Moses and Aaron, and the Lord in his grace and mercy did not consume them as they deserved. And so that's really important. Both of these are really important for us today because God has a design and an order for each and every one of us that each and every one of us has rejected at some level at some point in our lives. When you think about what sin is, it's just rejecting God's way and choosing our own way. That's what sin is. And there is just judgment that we deserve for rejecting God's order and trying to go our own way and choose our own design. And if we never repent of those things, it'll be too late for us, just like it was too late for Korah, like it was too late for the 250, Dathan, and Abiram. But then there's a second half to that. But praise God that we have an intercessor. And our intercessor is a whole lot better than Moses and Aaron. Our intercessor is Jesus the Christ, and he is constantly interceding for us to the Father, and all on our behalf when we give our lives to him. And we need to remember that every single day. And speaking of remembering things, let's read one more section, and we're going to see they needed to remember this. So look at verse 36, please, 36 through 40, and this will be the last section this morning, 36 through 40. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, that he shall take up the censers out of the midst of the blaze, for they are holy, and you scatter the burning coals abroad. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered sheets for a plating of the altar, since they did present them before the Lord, and they are holy. They shall be a sign to the sons of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers which the men who had burned had offered, and they hammered them out as a plating for the altar, as a reminder to the sons of Israel that no layman who is not of the descendants of Aaron should come near to burn incense before the Lord, so that he will not become like Korah and his company, just as the Lord had spoken to him through Moses. So these 250 bronze fire pans or platters or censers, they are now being told by God that Eleazar needs to hammer those into sheets that would cover the altar. What's interesting is the altar already had a bronze cover over it. So maybe this was a replacement or just, double protection for the wood of the altar. But the main purpose of this is a reminder to the people. When they bring their sacrifices into the tabernacle for their sins, for anything, they're going to see the bronze on that altar and they're going to remember no one who is not a descendant of Aaron can do this, can offer incense before the Lord. And they're going to remember that's holy. This is a reminder for me that no one can do that, or you're going to meet the judgment that came upon Korah and his company. And this brings us to our final point this morning, which is rejecting God's order is worth remembering. Rejecting God's order is worth remembering. If any Levite or any person in Israel started to think that things weren't going the way that they wanted, and you know what, I'm going to be a priest, they could look at that altar and be reminded, oh yeah, I don't need to do that. That would be a very serious sin for me to commit. And I think that's really important for us today, because I think it's easy for us to minimize sin sometimes. That we don't see sin as serious as it really is. Rejecting God's order is rejecting God himself, and it is a serious sin. It's not just a no. It's not just a slap on the wrist. It's not a trivial matter. Sin is the opposite of who God is. And he is holy and pure and can't be in the presence of sin. It's the exact opposite of who he is. And so it's worth it for us as we look at the design or the order that God gives in our families, in our congregation, or the boundaries on our everyday life. If we start getting big for our britches and we want to change God's order, change his design, or do things our own way, it's worth remembering that if we actually received what we deserved for our sins, we would be in the same spot as Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. If we want to talk about what we deserve, that's what we deserve for the seriousness and the weight and the filth of our sin. But again, praise be to God because we have an intercessor in Jesus Christ that is such a better intercessor than Moses or Aaron could ever be. Jesus is God himself who took on flesh, sacrificed himself, rose from the dead, and constantly intercedes for us to the Father so that we can be constantly cleansed of that sin. And that's what the good news is. And so as we close this morning, God's design, God's order for our lives is very, very good. It is very good, even if it's unpopular, and yet we've all rejected it in some way or another. Each of us has, because we sin. We choose our own way instead of his way. But the greatest intercessor of eternity is always ready to intercede on your behalf if we give up our own order and we accept his order. And so if you're here this morning and you want to study the scriptures about that intercessor, we would just love to do that. If you've already studied, you know that you need the cleansing that Jesus offers. We've got water and we would love to assist you with that. Or maybe you've been rejecting God's order in some way in your life that you want to make right. You need prayers of the congregation, or we can help you in any way. There's an opportunity now while together we stand and while we sing.